I never feared the sea, not until I came to Alien Moor. The journey to the Flannan Isles was uneventful, just the steady rocking of the boat, the scent of salt in the air, and the cries of distant gulls. Thomas Marshall, our head keeper, barely spoke, his gaze fixed on the lighthouse perched on the cliffs ahead. He was a seasoned man, broad-shouldered and quiet, with a face carved by years of wind and salt, a man who didn't scare easily. Donald McArthur, the youngest of us, kept fiddling with his coat buttons, restless. He wasn't a full keeper like Marshall and me, just an occasional worker, a replacement. A stout lad, eager to prove himself, but superstitious as hell. He'd already asked twice if we'd heard the stories. I had, but I wasn't about to entertain him. I should have paid more attention to that feeling in my gut, that whisper of unease creeping up my spine as we neared the shore. By the time we stepped onto the rocky island, the wind had picked up, howling through the cliffs like something alive. The lighthouse stood tall, unshaken, its great white tower a stark contrast to the blackened sky. I had always thought of lighthouses as beacons of safety. Now, standing at the base of this one, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more of a warning than a refuge. Inside, the place was as expected, cold, quiet, practical. The lighthouse was built in 3 main levels. The bottom floor held our supplies, tools, and the cramped kitchen, where a wooden table sat beneath rusted lantern hooks. A narrow staircase spiraled upward to the living quarters, where 3 beds were crammed into a tight space alongside a small desk and a foggy window overlooking the sea. The top floor housed the lamp room, where the great beacon stood behind thick glass, watching over the waters. Everything seemed in order, yet it felt abandoned, like no one had lived here for a very long time. A pot sat on the stove, a thin layer of mold creeping over whatever had been left inside. The beds were made, but the sheets were damp, clammy, as if someone had only just gotten up and walked away. The logbook sat open on the table. I skimmed the last entry, dated just a few days ago. It was routine, reporting the weather and lighthouse duties. But scribbled in the margins in a rushed hand were words that made my chest tighten. The storm is here, but there is no wind. I swallowed hard, shaking it off. Probably some poetic nonsense. We spent the rest of the day settling in, checking the oil, testing the light, securing the provisions. McArthur was uneasy, muttering about the air feeling too still. Marshall gave him a look that shut him up, but I knew what he meant. The wind outside howled, yet inside, everything felt unnervingly dead. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I listened to the deep, rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs. The lighthouse groaned as the wind battered its thick stone walls, but beneath it all I heard something else. A whisper. At first I thought it was just the wind snaking through the cracks in the walls, but the longer I listened, the more certain I became. It was a voice. Low, distant, carried on the breeze like a secret meant for my ears alone. It was saying my name. I turned onto my side, heart pounding. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just tired from the journey. But as I closed my eyes, the whisper came again, curling through the room like smoke. This time I understood the words. You shouldn't have come. I couldn't move. I lay frozen in my bunk, my breath shallow, my heart pounding so hard I swore it would wake the others. The whisper coiled around me, soft and distant, like a breath against my ear. I forced my eyes shut, my fingers gripping the thin blanket as if it could shield me from whatever was out there. It was just the wind. That's what I told myself. Nothing more. But the wind didn't know my name. I listened, every muscle tense, straining for another sound, for the creak of footsteps, the rustle of movement, anything to prove that it was real, or, God help me, that it wasn't. Nothing came, only silence. After what felt like hours, I exhaled, my breath shaking. I turned onto my side, facing the wall, forcing myself to ignore the cold sweat clinging to my skin. Sleep didn't come easy. When my eyes finally closed, I dreamt of the sea, a black tide swallowing the island whole. A dull clatter jolted me awake. I sat up with a start, disoriented, my mind still tangled in the edges of that dream. Morning light seeped weakly through the window, casting the room in a dull gray glow. The wind had quieted, but the air still felt thick, like something unseen still lingered. Downstairs, the sounds of movement echoed up the stairwell. Marshall already up. McArthur stirring in his bunk. For a moment, I just listened, half expecting to hear the whisper again. But the only thing I could make out was the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. I shook off the unease and swung my legs over the side of the bed, my boots hitting the cold wooden floor. I wanted to tell myself I'd imagined it, that the night had just played tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that room last night. By the time I made my way downstairs, Marshall was already at the table, spreading a thin layer of butter over a slice of hard bread. The scent of burnt coffee lingered in the air, bitter and stale. McArthur was slumped against the counter, staring at nothing, his fingers wrapped around a tin cup. He looked pale, unrested. Had he heard it too? I hesitated, then finally spoke. What happened to the last keepers? Marshall didn't answer right away. He took his time finishing his bite, chewing slowly, his jaw tight. They left, he said finally. I frowned. Left? You mean before the relief crew arrived? Marshall sighed, setting the knife down. They were gone when the supply boat came. No trace of them. No signs of struggle. Just gone. McArthur shifted in his seat, glancing between us. You mean they vanished? Marshall shot him a look. I mean they left. He paused, running a hand over his beard. Maybe they went mad. Isolation does that to men. Maybe they took the boat and drowned. Maybe they just walked into the sea. His voice was steady, but I caught something in his expression, something tight, something uncertain. No bodies ever washed up, I pressed. Marshall shook his head. Nothing. A chill crawled up my spine, and before them, any other strange happenings. At that, Marshall's jaw clenched. He picked up the logbook from the table and flipped through the pages, entries from the last keepers, neat and formal at first. Then, toward the end, the handwriting became erratic, desperate. One sentence was repeated several times, scrawled with increasing intensity. The storm is here, but there is no wind. I swallowed hard. Marshall closed the book with a thud. Best not to dwell on things we can't explain. He pushed away from the table and grabbed his coat. "Come on, we've got work to do." I stepped outside, pulling my coat tighter against the chill. The sky was an endless, dull gray, stretching over the sea like an old, worn-out sheet. The kind of sky that made it impossible to tell the time. The lighthouse loomed behind me, its tower cutting stark against the empty horizon. From the outside, it looked like any other lighthouse. Weathered, beaten stone, iron railings rusted from years of salt and wind. But now I knew what it hid inside. I couldn't stop thinking about the last keepers, their log entries, that one repeating line. "The storm is here, but there is no wind." I forced the thought away and followed Marshall and McArthur toward the cliffside. Our first task of the day was checking the oil storage in the shed. The same shed McArthur and I had found the boots in yesterday. The moment we reached the door, I felt it again, that same pressure in the air, like the weight of the sea pressing down on us. The wood was still scratched, the deep grooves running down the door frame. Marshall didn't seem to notice. He simply unlatched the door and stepped inside, his boots heavy against the wooden planks. McArthur and I exchanged a glance. He looked as uneasy as I felt. I stepped in after Marshall. The smell of damp wood and oil filled my lungs. Everything looked the same as before, barrels stacked against the far wall, crates of supplies untouched. But there was something off. It took me a moment to realize what it was. The boots were gone. I stared at the empty spot where they had been yesterday. A cold dread twisted in my stomach. Marshall grunted as he checked the barrels. "Everything's in order here." I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. We secured the shed and made our way back up the rocky path toward the lighthouse. The wind had started to pick up, the sea roaring below us. But even as the waves crashed against the cliffs, I still felt it, that strange absence of something. Like the island itself was holding its breath. The rest of the day dragged on in silence. Marshall busied himself with maintenance, McArthur cleaned the lantern room, and I took the midday watch. That meant sitting alone in the observation room, watching the horizon, scanning for any incoming ships. There was nothing, just the endless gray sea. Hours passed. I was just about to step away when I saw something move. Far down near the shoreline, barely visible against the dark rocks, a figure. I squinted, pressing closer to the window. No, not one, three. 3 figures standing perfectly still at the edge of the water. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. They were gone. My hands were ice cold. I hadn't looked away. I know I hadn't looked away. A shadow passed over the room as the sun dipped behind thick clouds. The glass of the lighthouse windows suddenly felt too thin, as if whatever had been watching from the shore was now watching from just outside. I turned, half expecting to see a reflection in the glass, someone standing behind me. But there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. That night, I barely touched my food. McArthur seemed just as on edge, glancing toward the window every so often. I wondered if he had seen them too. Marshall, on the other hand, ate like nothing was wrong. I set down my tin plate, my stomach too tight to eat. Has anyone else ever reported seeing people on the shore? I asked. Marshall didn't look up. You saw them then? My blood ran cold. What? He sighed, rubbing his forehead. You wouldn't be the first. McArthur swallowed hard. Who are they? Marshall's gaze flicked up, sharp and unreadable. If you're smart, you won't try to find out. Silence stretched between us. Then from somewhere outside, deep in the howling wind, came a sound. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not at the front door. At the lighthouse tower. At the window of the lantern room, far above the ground. We sat in silence, the sound still ringing in my ears. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, impossible. I felt McArthur stiffen beside me, his breath hitching. Marshall didn't move at first, just sat there, staring down at his plate like he hadn't heard a thing. But I knew he had. The wind battered the lighthouse walls, the windows shuddering in their frames. But no storm could explain the sound we'd just heard. Not up there. Not at the lantern room window. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. Did you hear that? Marshall exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Finish your supper. McArthur shot him a look. Are you joking? Another knock. Louder this time. Like whatever was out there knew we were hesitating. Marshall pushed his chair back and stood, his movements slow and measured. Stay here. Then he grabbed the lantern from the table and started up the spiral stairs. I looked at McArthur, he looked at me, and despite every instinct in my body telling me to stay put, I found myself following. The iron staircase groaned beneath our weight as we climbed. The air felt heavier the higher we went, like something was pressing down on us, making it harder to breathe. Marshall reached the top first. The final door stood in front of him, the one leading into the lantern room. It was locked, as it should have been, as it had to be. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Marshall raised a trembling hand and turned the key. The door swung open. The room was empty. The great glass panes of the lantern room stretched out before us, revealing nothing but the black sea beyond. The lamp stood cold and dark, waiting for nightfall. The wind howled, rattling the glass. But there was no sign of anyone, no footprints, no disturbance. Nothing. McArthur exhaled sharply. No way, we all heard it. I stepped closer, my hands clammy, my stomach twisting. I glanced at the window, the one we had heard the knocking from. I froze. A mark. A single hand-shaped smear against the outside of the glass. Something had been here. A long silence stretched between us. Then finally Marshall reached for the oil lamp, adjusting the wick with steady fingers. Keep watch tonight. His voice was quiet. Both of you. He turned and left, descending the stairs without another word. McArthur and I lingered, staring at the window. Neither of us said it. But we were both thinking the same thing. The window was 20 feet off the ground. Who or what could have knocked? We didn't sleep. McArthur took first watch, stationed by the main door, his rifle resting across his lap. I sat at the small writing desk, the logbook open in front of me, my fingers gripping the pen so tightly they ached. I wasn't even sure why I had opened it. Maybe for answers. Maybe because the scrawled warnings of the last keepers were starting to make sense. I flipped back to the last few pages. The storm is here, but there is no wind. Then, beneath it, written in a different hand, as if someone had added it later, perhaps in those final, frantic hours before they disappeared. They are watching. My breath caught in my throat. I turned to McArthur. He hadn't moved, his eyes fixed on the door, his hands white-knuckled around the rifle. The oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. Then somewhere outside, just beyond the lighthouse, we heard it. A low, distant wailing. It wasn't the wind, not this time. It was something else. Something calling our names. I don't remember standing up. One moment I was at the desk, staring at that final, desperate log entry. There watching. The next I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles burned, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Outside, the wailing grew louder. McArthur's chair scraped against the wooden floor as he shot to his feet. His rifle was already in his hands, eyes wide, darting to the door. "Tell me you hear that." I didn't need to answer. It was getting closer. A low, mournful cry, twisting and stretching through the wind like something not quite human, was calling to us. I swallowed the rising bile in my throat. It knows we're here. McArthur licked his lips, shifting his grip on the rifle. What do we do? A pause. Then from the stairwell, footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from above. We both turned at the same time, I snapping toward the spiral staircase leading up to the lantern room. The same lantern room we had just locked. Click, click, click. Boots against iron. Coming down. I didn't think, I acted. I grabbed the oil lamp from the desk, lifting it high. The flame flickered violently as I stepped toward the stairs. McArthur was right beside me, rifle raised, hands trembling. The footsteps stopped. The stairwell was empty. I felt a sharp chill wrap around my spine, something cold and unseen crawling through the air. The iron railings creaked, the faintest pressure against them, like something had just brushed past. Then from the darkness above, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." It was my voice. I nearly dropped the lamp. My legs felt rooted to the floor, my lungs frozen solid. It spoke in my voice. McArthur took a step back. That's... The main door rattled. Bang, bang, bang. The wooden frame shook under the force of 3 hard, deliberate knocks. Not from the storm. Not from the wind. Something wanted in. Marshall burst into the room, face set like stone. Upstairs, now. We didn't argue, we ran. Back up the stairs, past the cold iron railings, into the lantern room. Marshall slammed the heavy door shut behind us, bolting it. The three of us stood in silence, breath ragged, chests rising and falling with panic. The lamp's glow cast long, sharp shadows against the glass panes. Outside, the sea was a void. The waves weren't moving. The water below was still. Dead. I turned to Marshall, my voice hoarse. "What the hell is happening?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he strode toward the control panel and flipped the emergency signal switch. A shrill, piercing horn cut through the night. MacArthur and I exchanged glances. The signal horn, a distress call for ships nearby, for anyone listening. Marshall ran a hand down his face. I should have done that sooner. I swallowed hard. And the last keepers, did they try? Marshall's face darkened. They did. MacArthur's grip tightened around his rifle. And Marshall turned to the window. His voice was flat. No one ever came. The wind roared outside, slamming against the glass, but beneath it, beneath the noise, I still heard it. The wailing, calling, begging, laughing. And somewhere beyond the black horizon, something answered. A faint glow, distant, faint, a light. But not from any ship. Something was out there. And it was coming. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering in my throat. Outside, the air felt thick, charged with something heavy, pressing against the lighthouse walls. The wind had changed, not just in sound, but in weight, carrying an unnatural electricity that made my skin prickle. The lamp flickered. The iron frame of the lighthouse groaned. MacArthur shifted beside me, rifle still gripped tight. "The temperature just dropped," he muttered. His breath came out in a thin, visible mist. I turned back toward the window, my stomach twisting. Out at sea, the water was still deathly calm. Too calm. But above it, creeping over the horizon like something crawling on its belly, the clouds were turning black. A storm was coming. A storm that shouldn't be here. And neither should we. The horn's wail faded into the night. For a long, stretched moment, nothing changed. The wind still howled. The rain still lashed against the glass. The sea below remained unnaturally still. Then the lantern flickered. Just once, a split-second sputter of flame before it steadied again. I barely noticed at first until I saw MacArthur staring at it. He took a slow step backward. "That's not right." The lantern, the only source of light inside the tower, flickered again, this time longer, as if something had passed in front of it, but there was nothing there. Marshall exhaled sharply. He gripped the control panel, eyes locked on the horizon. "It's getting closer." I turned. The light on the water, the one that had appeared moments before the wailing began, was no flare, no beacon, no ship's signal. It was never a ship. We knew that now, but knowing didn't make it any less horrifying. It was too low, too smooth, gliding across the waves without a single ripple disturbing the surface. And it was coming straight for us. MacArthur's breath hitched. "No, no, no," What the hell is that? The distress signal should have been answered by now. Someone somewhere should have heard it. A ship, the mainland, someone. But the lighthouse radio remained silent, just a constant low static hum in the background. Then something clicked. Not inside. Outside. Like metal on metal, a deliberate, careful movement just beyond the glass of the lantern room. I felt it before I saw it. A pressure in the air, a weight, like something vast and heavy had just settled over the lighthouse. I turned my head slowly and saw the handle of the lantern room door twist. McArthur made a choked sound, stumbling back. It's locked, right? Marshall didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, staring at the door. The handle twisted again, harder this time, testing. Then, 3 slow knocks. Deep, hollow from the inside. My stomach dropped. That's not possible. The knocking came again, not from the main door below, not from outside. From inside the lantern room with us. And then, the light outside split. Not 1 glow, but 3. 3 tall, flickering figures standing on the water, their forms wavering like candle flames in the storm, featureless, shifting, watching. The moment I saw them, the air in the lantern room turned ice cold. My breath came out in mist, my fingertips numb even as sweat trickled down my spine. McArthur pressed himself against the far wall, rifle shaking in his hands. Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. Marshall finally moved. He took a step toward the control panel, reaching for the signal switch again. The lantern died. Total blackness. The only light left was outside, where the 3 figures stood, and in the sudden darkness, I swear, I heard something breathing. Not them. Something else. Something already inside. The last thing I saw before the lantern roared back to life was a 4th shadow, standing directly behind Marshall. The lantern flared back to life, and it was in the room with us. Tall, thin. A shape just outside the firelight, black against black, like a tear in the world itself. McArthur made a sound, a breathless, choking noise. His rifle shook in his hands. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The thing didn't move either, just stood there, flickering like the light outside, unstable, shifting, watching. Then it spoke. A whisper, so close to my ear I felt the breath that wasn't there. You let them in. I recoiled, slamming my back against the wall. My pulse roared in my ears. Did you hear that? My voice barely scraped out. Marshall turned to me, his face pale, unreadable. Hear what? You let them in. There it was again, a voice like the wind moving through hollow bone, but now it wasn't just near me. It was all around us. McArthur whimpered, his breathing ragged. I don't like this. Outside, the 3 figures had moved. They were closer now, no longer standing on the water's edge, but at the very base of the lighthouse. 3 flickering lights, 3 shifting forms, waiting, watching. Then, the main door slammed open. A deafening bang echoed up the stairwell, the sound of wood and metal bursting apart. The wind screamed through the lighthouse, but it wasn't just wind. There were footsteps, heavy, wet, dragging, coming up the stairs. One step, then another. Slow, deliberate. McArthur lost it. No, it was locked. He ran for the lantern room door, pressing his weight against it as if that would help. It's coming up. Marshall still didn't move. He just stared at me. Not at the door. At me. You let them in. No. I took a shaking step back, my hands pressed against my skull. The words didn't feel like they were coming from outside anymore. They were inside me, scratching at my thoughts, digging. Do you remember why you came here? The footsteps stopped, right outside the lantern room door. And then, a knock. Once, twice, 3 times. Just like before. But this time Marshall answered. He exhaled, slow and deep. His shoulders relaxed, and then, before I could move, he reached for the lock. I lunged. Marshall, don't. Too late. The bolt slid free. The door swung open. The lantern light flickered. Marshall stood in the open doorway, calm. Beyond him, the stairwell gaped like a throat, black, empty, waiting. But I knew it wasn't empty. Something was there. We all knew. McArthur screamed. His rifle jerked up, finger on the trigger. No, Marshall's voice cracked through the air like a gunshot. Not at the thing in the doorway, at McArthur. McArthur froze, trembling, barrel aimed at nothing. The stairwell was empty. But I saw it. I know I saw it. A shape shifting, flickering, right where Marshall stood. Then Marshall stepped forward into the room, shut the door behind him, bolted it. Like nothing had happened. He turned to face us, his face unreadable. McArthur was shaking. What the hell was that? Who was there? Marshall's eyes flickered to me, and I swear, for just a second, his face wasn't his own. His features blurred, like the figures outside, like something was wearing him. You let them in. The words crawled into my skull, burrowing deep. I stumbled back, head pounding, but McArthur, he moved first. He didn't hesitate, didn't speak, didn't think. He turned, unbolted the door, and walked outside. Marshall followed. I lunged forward, grabbing McArthur's arm. Mac, stop. Don't. He didn't even blink. Didn't acknowledge me. His face was slack, blank, like a puppet being dragged by invisible strings. Mac, please. My grip tightened, my nails digging into his sleeve, but he kept moving. Both of them did. Their steps perfectly in sync as they descended the spiral stairs, down past the quarters, past the records, past everything that made this place ours. I chased after them, but my body felt heavy like I was wading through deep, freezing water. I reached the main door just in time to see them step outside. 2 lights. 2 of the figures on the water turned. And my friends, they followed. No hesitation. No resistance. Just slow, steady steps toward the black, unmoving sea. I slammed into the door frame. Marshall, McArthur. Nothing. Their boots touched the shoreline. The tide didn't pull back. The waves didn't break against them. The ocean took them in, swallowed them whole. And I stood there, panting, shaking, still alive. Then the voice came back. Not from outside. From inside. You let them in. My breathing hitched. I turned trembling, but I was alone. Or at least I should have been. But I wasn't. Something was in my head, deep, rooted, curling around my thoughts like a fist. I took a step back. Then another. My heel hit the threshold. And I realized I was walking. Not running, not resisting. Walking. 1 foot in front of the other. The last figure on the water waited for me. And I followed. The door swung shut behind me. The lantern flickered. And the lighthouse stood empty,